Hello, hello. Welcome everyone to In Time. I do a regular public service announcement. It's in time, not on time. I apologize. We had some technical issues getting the sound in, so we have an interesting setup here. We actually activated the live call-in, so the Dr. Todd, and actually you may need to mute there because I'm picking up Dr. Todd on the background there. But so we activated the live call-in and had him call into the show because there was just technical issues. So he's here. We got him. He's called in. And let's see. All right, so that's good. Xander, how you doing?
Well, it's probably a good thing we started like 30 minutes early.
We've been at this for now 45 minutes trying to get this working, and we still ended up late, but we're here. And I really enjoyed having Dr. Todd on. He really knows what he's talking about. He's also just really funny and a lot of fun to have on, and takes the good-natured ribbing well. He was complimenting me too on just how good I looked in a red shirt right before. Hey, Xander was here. There's proof of this. So it's just he's a good guest to have on, and obviously has a good taste in hosts. And laughed a little too hard at that joke. So thank you all for joining us, and welcome Dr. Todd. Dr. Todd, how are you?
I'm doing just fine, and I appreciate you having me, Nick, and it's good to be on here with Eisendring as well. I'm looking forward to interacting with everybody.
It's going to be fun. Now, you had said earlier you wanted really a lot of pushback, and this is one of the things that I find interesting, and I did want to talk about this before we start. Because intellectually, there's something I say. I've never lost, and I said this last time, right? I've never lost a debate, ever, not once. And the reason is because if you approach it properly, one of two things is going to happen. You're either going to win, in which case you just won, or you're going to lose, which if you're doing it properly means you've learned something, you've grown, and you're better than you were yesterday. So if you take that approach going in, you will never lose a debate. And I think that's really worth doing. And I've noticed Xandring absolutely follows that. I've met a lot of people who say they follow that, and sometimes I forget that. So I try to own it, and it really is a part of who I am. But we all, we're human beings, and we're going to discuss that a lot, I think. But Xandring is one of those people who I think owns it just as much, and you are too, because what I noticed is when we had you on last time, and everybody says, give me pushback, and what I've noticed is whenever I hear that, I was like, okay, there's a 50% chance they don't want any pushback whatsoever. And they think they do. This isn't a lie. This is just lack of self-awareness of what pushback really looks like. So, but you are not that person. You really do want that pushback, and you want it to be better. So I wish in that position we had more where we could just say, oh, you're dead wrong. But all right, now we still are getting an echo. So I'm wondering if you have, do you have the audio open in some other way, or are you hearing our audio some other way? Because I think your phone's picking it up. So you've called in on your phone, and when I talk, it's picking it up. So we're getting this echo.
Is the echo gone away now?
I can talk for 30 seconds. Yep, it's gone. It sounds gone to me. Well, no, it's better. It's not gone, but it's significantly better. So this may mean I have to talk less, which is not a natural position for me. Yeah. I'm trying to figure out. Yeah, we're getting echo. Well, you know what it may be too is now since they can't even see you, I can see you, but they can't. You could also just take it off speaker in case we're getting the echo off the speaker, and just hold it like a regular phone call because you really are calling into the show. So I could put his video up, folks. I could, but there's at least a second disparity between the video and the audio because he's doing a call in, and it's a nightmare. It's a mess. But we're live. We're good. So why fallacies? What got you started with fallacies?
Okay, so what's the specific question about the fallacies?
Well, so you wrote a book about fallacies, and you're interested in fallacies. Why? I mean, there's global warming. There's gender issues. There's a tangerine that's trying to conquer this country. You decide to write about fallacies.
Well, I mean, what fallacies boils down to is the way that the human brain operates. It tends to want to begin with its bias, whatever it wants to believe, and then it uses the fallacies to try to bolster the bias. So whatever bias it has, if it says, well, I think the tangerine really knows what they're doing, then they're going to try to use every logical fallacy that they can to try to bolster that bias. The human brain being a pattern-seeking machine, it tends to fall back on these fallacies because they're fast, they're easy, they seem to make sense on kind of a superficial reasoning level, but when you start to examine them, you realize how weak they are. But it's the way that all of us operate. I mean, no matter which side you're on, whether you're on the tangerine side or not, we tend to fall back on them because they're so fast and easy. And I wrote the book because it's talking about the need for critical thinking to try to both identify the fallacies and to overcome them.
All right. Well, we talked about overcoming them last time, and I think we're going to want to get into that. And I think one of the things I'm going to try to do too is there's a couple of things I want to discuss and hit on, but I also want to make sure that Isandering, because Isandering, I think, was in the audience for that show, if I recall, but he wasn't able to actually participate as a host. So I think he's got some questions. We are still getting a bit of an echo. I don't think it's prohibitive, but it sounds like you're playing us. However, you're playing us or hearing us, it's echoing. I don't know if you're also showing the show or what it is, but every now and then I hear myself cutting through the noise gate. I could also boost your noise gate. If I boost your noise gate on our side, that may help. So if you don't deal with it, if you can't get it under control in a sec, I can give it a shot from this end. That's one of the reasons I like vMix is I got a lot of controls. Oh, much better. Whatever you've done, much better now. So, all right. So
just decrease volume.
All right, perfect. You may have to speak up and enunciate a bit more because now you're chopping a little bit, but we will get this under control. So I did want to show you something, and this is just I did this last time. I want to do this again this time, and then we'll sort of move on. So what we've got here is I'm a big fan of optical illusions. Now this is an optical illusion. This is a JPEG. You're just going to have to take my word for it because I could easily be tricking and fooling everybody here. We all know that's a hobby of mine, but this is actually just a JPEG, and you can print these out. I used to print them out and put them on paper and screw with my students mentally, which they're students. It's not that hard to do, but it looks like it's moving. It's not. Your eye is incapable of processing this image correctly. And it's because it turns out that our bodies are not perfect and we don't interpret things correctly. And this is just a great biological example, an easy way to show it. Here's another one where, it looks like these are moving. They're not moving. And when you start to see motion in one, you cause by your eyes being drawn to that, you cause motion in the other. And this is one of my favorites, and this one just throws me. There's no amount of times I can see this one and sit there and say, this isn't a trick. I swear to God, that one's moving. It's not moving. It's a static image. And but you are not capable of processing this correctly. And so here's things in your environment that you can't process correctly. And we also have troubles with logic. Everybody knows one of my favorites is affirming the consequent. Tinkerbell effect, which I hear is about to become famous. And so a whole bunch of others. So okay. So you were talking about processing and how human beings process information. So what can you tell us about how we process information? And we'll start to kick it off to his Andring so that he can. I don't know how many questions he's got, but he can usually come up with something. And whatever he says about it, that wasn't true about me and the elephant, and he keeps bringing that up. I don't know why. It was just a quick thing. It was done. I really had almost nothing to do. Has he brought that one up yet today, or did I just start? You know what? I think we should move on. So, tell me about the whatever the question was. Yes.
Yeah. Well, you bring up a great example with optical illusions. It's a wonderful example of how the brain is so easily fooled, how it tricks us. We desperately want to believe that our brains are reliable, that they're always giving us a realistic idea of what the world is about. And then you show something as simple as a optical illusion, something that could even be a static image. You look at it, and even as you see it, you're realizing that part of your brain is being fooled, while another part of your brain realizes, well, I mean, I kind of know I'm being fooled, but I can't stop it happening. And so you're left with this realization that as wonderful as you want to think your brain is, it's still faulty. And of course, optical illusions are just one example, but you can also point to any example from just, the day's news or from a video that you saw online, and you swear to God that you saw it correctly, and then you realize again that your brain could be being fooled at that very moment on a daily basis, but you still want to give your brain the benefit of the doubt. You want to say, I really think I'm seeing this as it actually is. I had a quote in my book by the neurologist Ramachandran, and he said something to the effect that really reality is just kind of the way our brain is hallucinating, and we decide what part of the data is matching our hallucination. And we just kind of accept the part of the hallucination that's closest to the data that everybody else can accept. And it sounds weird. I mean, it's like, people think, hey, I go through my whole life, I'm not hallucinating. But it kind of depends on how you define either hallucinating or perceiving or your brain being fooled. Everybody admits that they can make a mistake, but they never want to admit that they made a mistake because their brain was faulty or that their brain was tricking them. It's just not in our nature. We've got one brain to rely on for our entire life, and nobody wants to say, you know what, this one brain I've got, it's faulty. It's just, it's trying to trick me all the time. I don't know if I can really trust it or not. Maybe I'm going to have to trust somebody, some other talking head, on a screen that I'm looking at on my favorite, news show, because, gee, their brain seems to be so much more reliable than mine. And, of course, that's just a recipe for disaster. There's just too many talking heads out there, and their brains are no better than ours.
Yeah, but how can this really possibly be true? I mean, we're the dominant species on the planet. If our brains are tricking us almost all the time, which appears to be what you're implying, isn't the fact that we're the dominant species on the planet, we're the most, and look, we were able to land a man on the moon. How is that possible if our brains are tricking us nearly as much as you say it is?
Well, it's not that we can't overcome it. Quite often we can use critical thinking to overcome those problems, those biases, being fooled, and we can use math, science, medicine, these other fantastic attributes of our brain, and we overcome being fooled all the time. But it took, millennia for that to happen. I mean, for centuries, we thought, either rotted meat turned directly into flies, because that's what our brains seemed to perceive. It seemed to be a pattern. But our brains were fooling us because we didn't stop and examine the situation close enough and realize that, well, when we weren't paying attention, flies were landing on the rotting meat, laying eggs, and then, over several days, the eggs hatched and turned into flies. We just thought, hey, there's rotting meat and there's flies, and it all seemed to happen spontaneously. So on the one hand, our brains were fooling us, but then someone decided, this isn't working really well. This spontaneous generation of flies doesn't seem to really be working for us to be able to explain how the world works. If we started to kind of doubt ourselves and to overcome our biases, if we did some experimentation, we actually find out the way it actually works, and then we actually made progress. But you bring up a very good point, Nick, because you say, hey, we're such a successful dominant species on this planet, we landed somebody on the moon, and I think that that's an amazing achievement. But that's where a lot of people say, hey, I can't be fooled. I'm part of this species that landed a man on the moon. Look how incredible that brain is. It's impossible to fool that brain. It says, well, no. the men that men and women who came up with the mathematics and the engineering to land a man on the moon, they still had a brain that could possibly fool them. But they overcame that. They used critical thinking to come up with the mathematics, the engineering, and the success. And that's the difference, is that, yes, we have a foolhardy brain, but it's able to be overcome. But that's where people say, well, I don't know if I really want to work that hard. I don't want to think that hard most of the time, because I can use these, mental shortcuts on a daily basis. I can still get a paycheck. I can still, buy my house and my food and my clothing. And that seems to be good enough. Why would I work any harder with my brain when I don't have to? And that's what leads to the tangerines trying to lead the world here, is that they say, well, I'll put all my faith into the tangerine, and it seems to work. So that's where I kind of draw the line.
Well, and that's so, like, if it's natural to think that the sun revolves around us, right? Because we see it move. So we're going to say, okay, the sun must be moving around us. But it takes stopping and processing that for a minute and saying, if we moved around the sun from where we're standing, it could very easily look identical. So actually, just by looking at it, we really can't tell. It's a bias. It's sort of this, we're the center of the universe bias, which we've had for a long time. And, where every tribe thought it was the most important tribe, every nation, the only nation, every continent, the only continent. We thought we were the only planet. Turns out, no, there's a whole solar system. Yeah, but we're the only solar system. No, it turns out there's a whole galaxy, but there's only one galaxy. No, there's lots of galaxies and only one universe. Well, I'm betting there's more than one universe, but nonetheless, it's always us, the center of, we are the only ones. And so, the sun has to be moving around us because it would take some extra step in processing to realize you would be unable to tell if the conditions were as in fact they are. And it's from one side to the other. I do want to also quickly, before I go any further, somebody pointed this out, and I thought this was a great one. So let's do this one real quick too. The dress. This is the blue and black dress. Famously, nobody could tell what color this was. I forget who this was. I can probably look that up, but she wore it either to the Oscars or to some, and people said it's a beautiful black and blue dress, and other people said no, it's a white and black dress, and there was this huge argument over it, and people could look at the exact same image and say it was two completely different colors, and nobody could agree. And it wasn't until the designer came in and said, and now we're assuming that the designer got it right for some reason, but of course with the designer, if there is an objective way of measuring it, the designer could be just as wrong as everyone else, because how do you know that he did any independent study? He probably just saw the colors and liked them. But nonetheless, that's the dress. So thank you. Somebody brought that up in the live chat, and I saw that, brought that up. So I'm going to start to bow out a little bit. I don't know what his Andring's got or where he wants to go. But I want to give his Andring a moment to play in this space for a little bit. I'll hang in with the live chat a bit. Objects in the rearview mirror is grossly underrated, and I think when you take a look at what he's yeah, it's he was an emotional singer. But at any rate, all right, it says Andring, it's all yours.
Well, when we look at the way that when we look at evolutionary biology, none of this is very particularly surprising. We're concerned with medium-sized objects in a medium-sized world, and the function is to pass on our genes, and so biology cares about who's most successful at that. And the brains have come up with ways of shortcutting because there's so much information coming in, it can't process absolutely everything, absolutely all of the time, because nature tries to be as efficient as possible. So if you can get through, and this is why tangerines are trying to take over the country, if you can get through life without having to expend that extra energy, why would you? Conserving energy is beneficial to organisms. You don't want to expend it too much. So the brain has developed, the human brain has developed several shortcuts. I'm not entirely sure that you're being fooled by any of those things. I don't believe your brain is being fooled. It's receiving all of that stuff. The software of the brain is trying to decide what's important to you and tries to point those things out. When you look at a lot of optical illusions, many of them are shapes that you just don't find in nature. And it throws the brain for a loop because you see all these intersecting lines that you don't generally see in nature. And then so it short circuits the brain's ability to quickly process, accurately process, because that's, you have to be able to accurately process the world around you, at least those things that would, that could be a danger to you. Of course, there's several things that we can't see that are dangers, viruses, bacteria, etc. But the things that we're very concerned about, lions in the Saharan grass are very concerning. So your brain has to be able to accurately identify things like that, which is why we are predisposed, because you can be wrong 100 times about that lion, that there's a lion in the grass. But if your brain's correct once and you don't act, you're dead. So we tend to default to the position of, okay, our brain, one of the reasons why we recognize patterns and faces is because we're looking for those kinds of things in nature. And when we see it, we automatically associate with something living. And then we have to decide very quickly if that living thing is a danger to us. So our brains are very, very good at doing things like that. Not so great at some of the emergent properties when our brains got so big of things like logic, reason. We have to overcome some of that and try and actually use that excessive brain power. And I think we've done a very good job of it. And that, and along with the human's ability to change their niche, their environmental niche, has been the greatest superpower of human beings and why we've risen to prominence so much. It's like human beings live on every single continent where there's flora. We've managed to adapt, move to different niches. When you look at, there's very few other animals in the world that can do that. So, it makes me wonder sometimes. It's like, well, we've always had these biases, and as we've learned more and developed more technology, had more inventions, we've been able to get more accurate measurements that are independent of any kind of bias, and that's allowed for the rise of science, which has been a great advancement for the human race. I mean, in the last 100 years, the amount of people that lived in abject poverty has gone from the overwhelming majority of population living in abject poverty to very few people, or a lot fewer people in the world. I mean, in the last 10 years, we've cut the absolute poverty rate in half. So the brain can do some amazing things, and I think a lot of the things that it can do were an emergent property based on other developments. And it's really fascinating at how complex it works and how many times it can go wrong. Well, I meant to ask a question in there somewhere.
There's been amazing progress. I mean, that's not even my point. I mean, yes, we've made amazing progress. I just say it's despite the fact that the brains that are involved are so easily fooled. You even brought up the point of the optical illusions that are bringing up shapes that the brain isn't able to, or is not used to. That they're not found in nature. And that's my point, is that our brains have evolved to be good enough to help us reproduce, but they're still very inefficient in some ways, and they're easily fooled by even Nick's optical illusions, or even just everyday patterns. It's why people were wondering, hey, isn't JFK Jr. going to show up in Dealey Plaza here because he's going to team up with Trump, and they're going to come back and be the president and vice president of the United States again. And it's like, okay, these people that are showing up in this plaza, they're probably just as intelligent as you or me. I mean, their brains are incredibly similar to yours and mine. But you say, well, if they're as intelligent as we are, how can they be fooled this way? How can they possibly see some kind of pattern and think that it's going to end up with something as preposterous as JFK JFK Jr. coming back to life and teaming up with Trump? I mean, you think, okay, well, they're crazy, they're stupid, they're uneducated, they're ignorant, and the fact is, they're probably not. They're probably intelligent, probably educated,
I don't
probably
believe
experienced, but
I don't believe they are. They're just
by a pattern
emotional.
that they sense that they haven't been able to apply critical thinking to try to overcome. And of course, that's just 1 in 10 trillion examples of irrational reasoning that people come to with all sorts of, preposterous ideas. It's not a question of intelligence. It's not a question of their potential of their brain. It's just the fact that they are letting their brain, well, not letting, but their brains are fooling them, and they haven't done the extra step of the critical thinking to overcome it.
Right, and human beings are emotionally driven far more than they are by rational thought. Emotional things affect us far more than cold clinical facts, for example. We don't find that inspiring. We find the Rudy movies inspiring. We find Hoosiers inspiring because they're emotional. So we think emotionally before we think logically. And so if something feels good, and the fact that you can get through life without having to particularly expend the extra energy to analyze everything to find out if you're being fooled. All of this has worked. This feels emotionally good. My life's going good. Things aren't trying to eat me. This works. And so that's, they keep going on that way.
Well, yeah, I mean, of course, emotion, like you say, is huge. It tends to be the primary way that people approach the world. And in addition to that, even without emotion, though, I mean, people tend to go with heuristics, the mental shortcuts, the rules of thumb, to kind of get them through the day, even without emotion. I mean, when I drive to work every day, I don't use any emotion, but I probably also don't use a whole lot of critical thinking. I just kind of stay between the dotted lines as I'm going and try not to go through too many red lights on the way. But that's just a mental shortcut. I'm not really thinking actively about, staying safe. But it's the mental shortcuts that tend to get us into the problems, because we just say, hey, I've thought this way about this political issue for years or decades, and I'm still successful. So why on earth would I change my mind or even start thinking harder about this political issue? I've done very well the way I have been. My family's always been of this political party. Why would I change? And we keep banging our heads saying, why are these crazy people doing these things? And but we don't realize it's because they're not using the critical thinking to question themselves, to see why their brains are leading them this way. We're kind of mentally lazy. I'm no better than anyone else. I'm pretty mentally lazy unless I stop and think, am I thinking critically about a particular issue? And I'm no better than anybody else. But just because we're all the same doesn't mean that we all shouldn't be working in that same direction.
Well,
I agree. We should be working in that direction.
Yeah. You mentioned, I want to do a super chat, and I want to bring up one thing. So you mentioned heuristics, and I think that's interesting because I'd heard this example, and I like this one. Okay, so there's 8 billion people on this planet. You can't give all of them the same credulity. You can't give all of them the same, time and attention. So you're going to have to use some heuristic of some kind to take a shortcut and say, what are some generalizations I can make and hopefully be more accurate than less over time as to who's credible and who isn't. And we have things to help us with that. We have like the PhD moniker, which says that at least you've been through a certain kind of process that suggests that at least in certain areas that you have training and an ability, and hopefully that kind of thing helps. But so we spend most of our time not employing this because it takes actually much more energy. Your brain uses much more energy in your body than people think. They think it's all your muscles and all this. No, it's actually your brain that uses up the vast majority of your calorie all the carbohydrate, the calorie reserves, if I'm correct. So all of us are aware that there is this other level of thinking where we can sit and really start to either listen. And most of us don't actively listen either, right? We just sit there and kind of half listen and so on and so forth. But we're aware that we can kind of up our game and we can engage more. But if you think somebody needs to up their game and they need to be engaging a bit more critically and a bit more more actively, how can you do that if you've already been relegated to I'm not going to give these political views a shot? And when somebody says, well, I want you to sit and think about it for a minute, and even you could be completely correct and have the best points in the world, if you're not going to get them to engage that extra level, how do you do that? But before you answer that, Sinister Porpoise, $2, I live with Hoosiers. Few are emotionally inspiring. It was a good movie, though. You have to admit, Porpoise. It was a good.
Not a
movie.
particularly accurate one, though.
Well, up till the end, the ending was different than the real life. But other than that, it was and the guy never. But I'll you know what? We're not. Is Andring? Stop trying. This is why I don't like to do shows with conservatives. They're constantly derailing the good topics. It's just like, who cares if it was? And this isn't a bias. This is just my experience of conservatives and the one conservative who we've ever had on this show. It's not a biased opinion at all. But anyway, so I think I put out a question there. So if you could hit a Dr. Child, then I'll try to shut up again for a little while.
Well, were you asking me the question?
Not the Hoosiers question. I don't think we need an answer on the Hoosiers question. The Sinister, thank you so much for the super chat, your support. But I think we're all in agreement that few are emotionally inspired. No, I don't think I want to say that. But at any rate, no. So
I think you're asking a question about people that if they have a political bent, how do you get them to reassess?
Yes.
If somebody gives them a contrary opinion. Just using my own example, of course, I thought my brain was reliable, and I was very willing to just stay with my own opinions on whether it's politics or child rearing or whatever contentious subject you want to bring up. But in my own case, it was when I started reading a list of logical fallacies and cognitive biases. And after I read through about half a dozen, like confirmation bias, the file drawer effect, the backfire effect, ad hoc reasoning and such, I started getting a very sick feeling in my stomach because I very quickly realized that I do these things too. I just wanted to believe it of my opponents. Of course, I wanted to believe that my opponents were the ones that were reasoning poorly, and that's why they came up to their ridiculous positions on their political issues. But then I came to the horrible realization that I was thinking in the same way about my side of the issues. And so that's, to answer your question, that would be my suggestion, is for everybody to become familiar with the list of logical fallacies and cognitive biases, because if they're honest, then they're going to realize that they do it as well. And yes, they can put a brave face on in front of opponents. They want to look good in a debate. But when they're by themselves and they have to go to sleep at night, they can't escape their own brain. If they're honest, they're going to realize, okay, no matter how I debated today, I realize that I might have gotten that way through very faulty means. That's our only hope. If you try to convince somebody by out-arguing them, it's not going to happen very often. Maybe 5% of the time, you might actually get someone to admit that they're wrong. Most of the time, they're just too defensive. They're going to try to save face. They have to toe their line, and their brain is not going to want to experience the cognitive dissonance of their position and then the contrary position that's actually pretty strong. So my feeling is that the only way forward is for each person on each side of the debate to do their own homework in the privacy of their own home. They don't have to do this in front of anybody. If they can admit to themselves that their brains are faulty, that they're possibly tricking them, and that they're using these bad fallacies, then they can possibly admit to themselves, okay, I need to reassess this. And, you probably know of plenty of examples where people have renounced their religious beliefs because of this kind of thinking, some of their political beliefs. And again, on any contentious subject you can imagine, when they've done the mental homework at home. But again, the first step is just to kind of realize that their own brains are so faulty that they're using these biases and fallacies. Otherwise, you're just kind of banging your head against the wall, hoping that all the rhetoric that you're spewing is going to change somebody's mind. It makes for great entertainment. I mean, there's lots of shows that bank on this. They say, hey, we just love having arguments, and people just love tuning in to listen to this. But if it's actually going to cause any progress, it's going to have to be the very unentertaining homework that people do in their own brain.
Well, one of the other issues that we run across is, different people care about different things in different degrees. So to give an extreme example of this, in the U.S., we have a lot of people very concerned about global warming and the future of the planet. It's important to quite a lot of people. And they have the luxury of it being an important issue. If you're living in the middle of Africa, have no running water or electricity, and you're burning dung for heat in the wintertime, assuming it gets cold enough, you don't give a crap about global warming. You don't care at all. You care about providing for your family. So we run into areas where different people care about different topics, and it's not necessarily that they may not care about the topic that that you genuinely care about, but it's way lower on their list of priorities than something else. And so you wonder how people can support somebody like Trump. Well, many people may find something about him that is more important to them than some other things. And it's not that it's not unimportant, it's not as important. And so they're willing to put up with a certain amount of evil, because you never get the perfect candidate, you never get the perfect anything in your life. There's always some sort of trade-off somewhere. So they're willing to trade off in these areas to try and at least go after some of these perceptions. And it's not an entirely, let's just get you out of jail for free card just because you care about something else, because sometimes some of those things are pretty heinous. But if you don't care so much about it that you're not paying close enough attention to what's really going on, and because you don't care about it, you're not paying as close attention to people that are trying to point this out to you, it can get very frustrating trying to argue with people because that's not a priority of theirs. They have some other priority somewhere else. And when you have all of these different people that have all of these different priorities, it can sometimes be very difficult to get everybody to agree. It's like herding cats.
Well, yeah, I mean, I totally agree that people have priorities, and that somebody in Africa who's just worried about, clean water isn't going to be as worried about, those kind of political issues. And again, at any level of interest, you can still apply the critical thinking. Let's just take the person in Africa who's trying to get clean water, and they say, you know what, we've been praying to this river god for years to give us clean water, and we still have a lot of people dying from these diseases that are born in the water. And so it's when they finally decide, you know what, we're so tired of seeing our loved ones die from all this that we're going to start trying to investigate and see if there's something else going on besides a God that just doesn't seem to like us. And then they start doing these kind of rudimentary scientific investigations. It's like, hey, holy cow, upstream, there's a whole lot of cattle that are defecating into the river. And, maybe we're drinking a lot of the water that's mixed up with their feces. Maybe that's what's causing the problem. And even though that's a very rudimentary level of science, but it's still science. It's observation. It's doing kind of a rudimentary experimentation. As soon as they have the cattle upstream stop defecating in the water, they notice, hey, not as many people are dying anymore. So, like you say, everyone's got different focuses. Some people are just trying to survive. Some people are just trying to put food on the table, and some people are trying to keep crazy people out of the White House. But that's the great thing about critical thinking, is that it applies at any level. There's no human concept, no human idea that you can't apply this to. And that's why I wrote the book the way that I did. It's in a very general form. It doesn't take on any particular contentious subject. It wants to be applied to any subject. And that's why I like to have people try to give me pushback. I like them to try to bring up any subject that they don't think that this could apply to. And so far, nobody has been able to, because nobody can bring up a subject that isn't created by a human brain.
Of course.
Porpoise is going to say solipsism.
I run the risk of sounding like the anti-rationalist that doesn't believe critical thinking is important, and being able to, science and education isn't important, and it absolutely is. And I honestly think that's the only way that we're going to save ourselves from eventual doom, is to be able to think our way out of these problems. But there's a lot of reasons why we get trapped into these cycles, and I'm not entirely sure how successful we're going to be in convincing enough people to care enough about, critical thought, making sure they're not falling victim to fallacies, and that they recognize that everybody has biases, and that you sometimes don't recognize your own bias, so you should pay a little extra attention to what you're thinking about. It's like I grew up, and because of the area that I grew up, I ended up growing up with a prejudice. And I have a prejudice. I've had a prejudice my whole life. I'm aware that I have that prejudice, and it doesn't change the fact that I have it. I still have it to this day. But I'm aware that I have that prejudice, and so anytime that topic comes up, I have to take extra steps to make sure that I'm not just falling back on that prejudice, but that I'm, doing my darndest to make sure I'm looking at it objectively. So even knowing all of that, I can still fall victim to that prejudice. And of course, if you start getting really invested in a topic, you will tend to fall victim to biases a lot easier, even if you're looking out for them. So yeah, it's a really difficult thing, and trying to get the population to try and embrace expending the extra time and energy, especially when some of the people don't really care. They care more about their family surviving, spending time with their kids. They don't really care about all of the, trying to get rid of biases, because their life has worked thus far and they don't want it to change.
Yeah, I mean, I totally understand what you're saying. I mean, this is not a popular concept. Nobody wants to, again, assume that their brain is faulty or tricking them. And I consider my hypothesis here in the book a very hard sell. Nobody wants to think that they need to think any harder than they actually are. But the where I get frustrated and where I think a lot of people get frustrated is they keep saying, and I even have it on the back of my book, how can people believe such crazy things? How can people do such heinous things? And then my answer is because your brain is fooling you, and it may not be a popular notion, but the only way to approach all of these things with one attempt is with critical thinking. You can apply critical thinking to anything, whether it's popular or not. Again, I don't think that people are going to say, "Hey, critical thinking, yeah, let's all get on the critical thinking bandwagon." It's probably going to be something that has to be started off at the public school level, inundated upon people through YouTube and constant Facebook ads and such to say, "Do you really think you know? Do you really understand how your brain is working to get you to your political views?" It's going to be something where you have to just bludgeon people because, as you point out, it's not a natural thing for people to question themselves. They don't do that. They say, "I'm comfortable doing what I'm doing. I'm successful. Why do any more?" But I can't stop when people say, "Well, how come this political party is doing such crazy things? Why don't these people stop and think?" I say, well, there's a way around that. I mean, it's not that difficult, but you just have to do the extra mental homework. And that's what my book goes into in some detail.
Let me ask you a question, because I think one of the things that happens is that people get information overload. So you start to talk about, and I know, because I used to teach fallacies. I used to teach Introduction to Philosophy, and would talk about logic. And one of the things that it looks like is, since there's basically a fallacy for everything, and then you can just say, well, how do I know that I'm not succumbing to a fallacy when I'm looking at these fallacies? And maybe there's a fallacy here, here, here. And so you end up with this infinite regress. And I think this is interesting because, as Andrew was talking about, and I think we've all been in these positions, some more than others, but I think, where we've sat and we've said, you know what, there's something that I believed for a very long time. I had a life experience, a prolonged life experience, just time and time and time again. I got reinforced with something that I thought was true universally and across the board. One of them may be, for example, my hometown, cops murdered people regularly, whether it was people the color of my skin or a different whatever it is. And so the idea that there are actually honest cops out there is kind of like, come on, give me a break. We're all just pretending, right? You and I both know no cop is honest. So, and then you can maybe realize that, okay, this is just a fallacy, but okay, how do you know if you couldn't trust yourself back then, or what you thought back then was false? How do you know I'm not committing another fallacy now? How can I? And so I have to believe, and one of the things that I saw a lot was people would look at all this and say, well, I can apply all of this to any information at all the time. So I don't even know where am I grounded? Where can I be anchored if absolutely everything is up for grabs all the time? And I think when Xander was talking about something. Okay, so actually, let's get back to the cop example for a second. So if I realize that, okay, there are actually, just as in any profession, a range of good cops, a range of bad cops. It also has to do with socioeconomic factors and a million other things. But then I see a cop doing something, and I say, okay, I'm going to try to assess whether it's legit for me to say, oh my God, he's a horrible person, or maybe he was justified. But I can't trust how much of my old biases are coming in, how I'm looking at. And so, I would see this just overwhelming. I just want to give up because it could be any bias anywhere at all times and just an infinite regress to I don't know anything. So how do we solve that?
Well, it's good that you mentioned that because, like you say, you're always kind of wondering if this is an infinite regress, if the fallacy you're reading about, you're also having a fallacy about that. And this is a great example where science has shown you can overcome these kind of things because science realizes that every single scientific investigator is also biased. And so they've come up with ways to avoid the bias. They say, we're going to have a double-blind study. We're going to make sure that the investigator doesn't realize what's being used, and the subject doesn't realize what's being used. We're going to totally take out their bias and see what we get. And then when we get the results, we can, of course, analyze them, but we're not going to stop there. Even if we publish the paper, you know what we're going to do? We're going to do peer review. We're going to put it into a community of other people that have other biases. And we're going to see if they can set their biases aside, look at our analysis, and come up with the same thing. And even then, it doesn't become science. It only becomes science when it's been used for years and has shown success. And even then, it's still not immune to being augmented or changed if something better comes along. So science learned, pretty early on that, okay, everybody is biased. How do we get around this? We have to get around the biases. We have to do experimentation in the most pure way possible. And even then, we can't stop. We have to put it into the community and have other people compare their experiences with ours. So whether you're talking about the police brutality or whatever like that, you have to say, okay, well, am I experiencing the same thing as the victims? Am I experiencing the same thing as a different part of the country? And are we experiencing something different than a different country? And you start realizing, okay, well, these people with different life experiences and different biases, if they can put aside the biases and see what commonality there is, if there's, some kind of justice somewhere in here, that's where laws tend to be made, and that's where communities and cultures tend to be healthier, is when people come together with a consensus after they put aside their biases and they find the consensus that works the best for everybody. And again, it's science is just a specific form of critical thinking, but it's progressed so quickly, and we've gotten the advantages and the progress from it because it puts aside the biases so early on. But then when you talk about politics and other things, people don't put the biases aside. It drags us down. And we wonder how, after centuries, we can still be dealing with things like misogyny and racism and all the other kind of problems that we have in the culture because people haven't put their biases aside yet. They haven't done the critical thinking the way science has.
So I know Xandring had brought something up interesting about this a while back that we had been talking. I don't know if he wants to go into that or somewhere else, but he had talked about sort of almost also well, first of all, it sounds like you're talking about open sourcing knowledge, which I think is sort of what science does, and that may be worth discussing. But that aside, also about what happens when you introduce a sample from a biased people to people with different biases, as Xandring. So was that something you might be willing to expound on if you feel that's appropriate?
Oh, yeah, I think that's kind of how one of the ways that the scientific method ended up coming about and how we do science today, was, everybody, different groups doing different research into the truth of the world around them. And they all had biases. And when you started open sourcing information together, even if it was biased, if that information could still be held true even after passing through 30 other groups with all of their own biases, then you probably had something that was pretty close to the truth. Because the multiple different biases would have eventually start canceling each other out. And so I didn't think that bias was quite as big of a deal. Of course, you talk about the Elizabethan era, where a lot of this started really getting rolling, with all the different people had lots of different biases going on. But of course, there's the counter argument that there was a lot of crappy shit going on too that was probably caused by bias as well. Excuse me. I about choked to death.
Oh, you okay?
Live on air. So
well, it wouldn't be the first time somebody's died on our air. It would be the first time we lost a host on our air. And dude, as much as you and I on occasion do disagree, and those disagreements, I was going to say, can get really heated. They've never gotten heated on it. There's never a time you and I have actually gotten heated, no matter what the topic. But nonetheless, I would rather we not lose a host on or off air. So, yeah, okay. As long as you're good.
Yeah, you say that, but I'm drinking this awesome iced tea that you mailed me, so I'm thinking that maybe that wasn't a wise choice.
Okay, just as long as you didn't share that iced tea with anybody else, I think we're good. So you were saying?
what was I saying? I just totally, entirely
so science and open
inhaled a
source.
half a lung.
Jeez.
Oh,
Yeah,
today.
try not to aspirate on air, but okay.
So we saw, a lot of different groups with a lot of different biases starting to throw ideas together, and we started to see some things, survive all of the different biases, and we started saying, okay, these are probably likely true, and then the process evolved into modern science. Today we have a double problem. One, there aren't any selection pressures to choose the most successfully critical thinking people. So we're not spreading more correct. We're not spreading any more of the critical thinking skills by eliminating those that don't think critically. There are no selection pressures for it. And secondly, moving into modern technology with things like social media, which are specifically designed to create groups of biased people. The social media platforms are very interested in showing you the things that you're interested in seeing. So if you already have a bias, you're going to be biased towards those things, and those are the things that you're going to look, and they want to be able to figure those things out, show you more of those so that you engage more with their platforms. They can show you more advertisers. So we're building up echo chambers, and we're building up and fragmenting into groups of biases. And I think those two things are a future problem for us to try and overcome, and I'm not sure how we're going to do that. Do you have any ideas on how to try and break that down?
You're exactly right that they're all echo chambers, and of course I'm no better than anyone else. I love to have my biases confirmed to me. I try to make a concerted effort to hit websites that have contrary views to my views, just so I can try to overcome that. But yeah, the vast majority of the time, what am I going to do? I'm going to look for a source that echoes back my own bias to me because it feels good. I get a little shot of endorphin in my brain when it happens. And so you're exactly right. I mean, it's getting worse and worse because everyone's addicted to their screen. And that's why I subtitled the book the way I did, The Critical Need for Critical Thinking. It's only going to get worse. So the need for critical thinking is going to get more and more imperative because it's our only hope. If everybody just goes with what feels good and what entertains them, we're doomed. We're going to keep looking at our screens as global warming, burns up the planet. There was I can't remember what I think it's called the movie Don't Look Up, about the impending, asteroid hitting the Earth, and everyone's just kind of going along saying like, hey, I'm comfortable doing what I'm doing, and the Earth gets, destroyed. It's like, that's why I wrote my book, is like, I can't stand watching this happen. It's like everyone's comfortable. They're entertained by screens and by where they're eating out and their family life. But they keep wondering, gee, why is this stuff so bad sometimes? And I say, well, have you stopped and thought about it? Have you stopped and thought about how you think? So
yeah,
it's
let them eat cake.
Critical need for critical thinking. There's no other way around it.
Yeah, I mean the phrase "let them eat cake" comes to mind.
Yeah, that's the embodiment of it. I think.
Sure. Yeah. And a lot of people died eventually from that.
Well, okay. Wow. So there's a couple of different places I want to go. So that's a good one, and also the well, we do expect everyone else to do it because we are also the center of our own universes. So there was a Facebook meme, something along the lines of, I kept somebody asked me, and they was like, well, why is nobody doing anything about this? I said, well, why aren't you doing anything about this? And you answer that question,
yes.
And probably figure out why nobody's doing anything about it. So I do want to address, as Andrew brought up some good points. I'd like to split off into these, and we started a little late, and it's a good topic, so we're gonna go a little longer than usual tonight. But we'll try to hit these in order, and we'll see how we do for time, or not in order. Sorry, in order of whatever is the most, whatever you want to talk about most. But I do want to at some point ask you a bit about which ones you think are the worst and affect us the worst in terms of these these biases, which you might find the most interesting. But as Andrew brought up selection pressures, and I was wondering if that may be starting to move a little bit beyond your field here, but if you could maybe opine a bit on, is that the case? Or do we no longer have, one of the reasons evolution worked so well was because if you made a lot of mistakes, you were eaten, and you wouldn't pass, those genes on. And so we've now managed to remove a lot of the pressures that would keep us evolving, that would keep us sort of improving in one way or another. Are there new pressures? Is the economy a social pressure? But what would that be selecting for? Again, I know this is a little out of your field, so we'll try to keep that in the realm of biases. So, and then also social media. And why is it that we get that endorphin hit? Was that just sort of nature tinkering with us and saying, well, whenever you hear something you like, you're going to get the endorphin hit? Or was there actually like an evolutionary reason for that? And then Sinister Porpoise, $2. Thank you so much, Sinister, for your support. We really appreciate it. We get demonetized all the time, and opening up with meatloaf certainly doesn't help. But thank you very much for your support and the $2 super chat, saying unless algorithms pick up data based on our biases. And that's a really interesting one. I think last time we were here, we talked about, I think we talked about the target picking up on when the target chain picked up on using an algorithm, picked up on that a man's daughter was pregnant before he knew she was pregnant. But let's thank you, Porpoise, for that. And so selection pressures.
Selection pressure? It's incredibly powerful, because just I think the example that Eisendring used was the lion in the grass, a very common example, because if you guess wrong, you're eaten. But if you guess even if you guess wrong and there's nothing there, but you run away, you're still alive. And so that's the way our brains got wired. They discovered that, hey, I can err on the side of caution and be wrong and still survive. So think about that. Now your brain is used to thinking wrong and still benefiting. That gets wired into your brain, being wrong and benefiting. And that's why I bring up that people can have crazy, political views and other views and still be successful. And their brains, that's the way their brains are wired. They think, as long as I'm successful, I must be thinking right. And that's where the danger is. There are so many people that, when we talk about atheism, atheism to me is a very unimportant aspect, because people can be atheists for very bad reasons. They can say, you know what, I had a bad experience in church, so now I'm an atheist. And I laugh at that. I think that's one of the lamest reasons to be an atheist. You didn't use critical thinking to become an atheist. You just said, well, I had a bad experience, so I don't want to deal with that anymore. And so one of the most dangerous things, one of the most the damaging thing is being right for the wrong reason. Because people say, hey, I was right. What's wrong with that? I'll just keep on doing whatever it was that got me right. They could say, I threw a dart at a dartboard and it gave me the right answer. You know what I'm going to do? From now on, I'm just going to use that dartboard for every decision I have to make, because I was right that one time, so that pattern must just keep on working. And that's what really scares me, and that's because it's what a lot of people think. They say, I voted for this candidate, things turned out well, so I'm going to keep on voting for candidates of this political party only, because the first time I did it, it really, really worked well. And they don't think critically anymore. They just think, hey, this was a shortcut, it was a mental shortcut. It gave me an endorphin rush when everything, worked out well that time. So why would I change anything? And that's why critical thinking is so critical, is because you can be successful and you can be right sometimes, but it can fool you into thinking that you're always going to be right if you just keep on using that same pattern.
Well, our leaders are also figured out that emotional manipulation is far more effective than logical manipulation or giving them logical critical thinking. So we've built, because emotional manipulation is often very effective, we've started electing leaders, and have been now for a while, based mostly off of emotional means. Which one makes us feel the best about them, and that's the people that we're going to put in power. And so we're rewarding those very people that are emotionally manipulating us rather than giving us, the cold hard facts and actually standing up and saying, no, I realize that this is going to be painful, but it's going to be far more painful in the future if we don't do this now. And we end up with a lot of problems, like a $30 trillion national debt, as an example. So I think that we're selecting for all of the wrong things.
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes in the book was by the dean of science fiction, Robert Heinlein, and he said, "You can convince 1,000 people by appealing to their bias faster than you can change one person's mind by logic." It's exactly what you're saying. Like, hey, well, why try to go into a lot of not harebrained, but a lot of deep thinking when all I have to do is appeal to their emotion, to their bias? I mean, they already want to hear this. All I have to do is appeal to what they already want to hear. And, we saw what happened with the last administration with that. It's like all I have to do is appeal to how these people feel about immigration or these other people that are taking their jobs. It's like I don't have to go into any detail or even any, actual statistics or anything. All I have to do is appeal to the way that they want to think. And boom, you get elected when nobody thought it could happen.
Well, that also brings to mind the colloquialism, you can't reason somebody out of a position they didn't reason themselves into.
Thomas Swift.
Well, that's a good one.
Exactly right. But again, it's just, people don't think, well, I have this opinion because I reasoned myself into it. They said, I have this opinion because it feels good, or it's worked for me in the past, or my family's always thought this way, or my whole community's always thought this way. Why would I even push back on any of this?
Well, and of course, when you add confirmation bias to that, it may be true, but it also may not. But you're only seeing the evidence that supports that conclusion in the first place. So now it's you're double entrenched. Okay, so we got a super chat, $10, and there's no way I don't even CRBVE gas. I'm sure I screwed that up.
CRB Vegas.
Oh, CRB. So, well, now, okay, thank you, CRB Vegas. All right. Yep. So thank God one of us here knows what they're talking about. It's not the guy who's had the camera on all day. Trust me on that one. So, but thank you for that, Xander. $10. And what I'd like to do here is, this is a good question. It's half on topic, half off topic. But since we have a liberal, a conservative, and I imagine maybe lean slightly liberal, but all of us have slightly different perspective on this. This would be an interesting one. So I'd like to everyone take a minute and see if in just 1 minute you can maybe come up with an answer to this. What the question is or what they're saying is, the left thinks in terms of solutions. The right thinks in terms of trade-offs to those solutions. So I guess maybe frame it also, if you chose. The left thinks in terms of optimism, and the right maybe in terms of pragmatism. Might be another way to think of it. But neither of these have an exclusive claim to critical thinking. So if that's what do each of you, and I'd like to start with Dr. Todd and then have Xander go in, and we'll go. I'll say my piece, and we'll get right back to the topic and start to wrap up a couple last questions I have. But anyways, Dr. Todd, what are your thoughts on
that? I don't know if I even agree with the way that they describe the left and the right. I don't think it's that simple. I think that's kind of kindergarten reasoning that you have to pigeonhole something that simple. I mean, there's no way to make something so complex as politics into just solutions and compromises. So I don't lean one way or the other. I disparage both political parties. I just want to put critical thinking towards everything. So I'm going to defer to Eisendring if he's got something a little bit more cogent about that particular question.
Well, I mean, you bring up a good point that's an extreme oversimplification of the two sides, but that both sides, even though there's a tendency on the left to be, to think that we can do everything and we can solve everything, and a tendency of conservatives to say, look, a lot of these solutions have unintended consequences, and there's trade-offs with other things because, resources are finite and we have infinite desires. So we have to be able to, look at what the trade-offs are going to be in that. And again, a gross oversimplification of everything involved, because there's a huge number of things. It's immensely complicated. And we need both sides, because we need to have people who can come up with solutions, say, hey, these are problems. We can fix this and let's do it. And they start throwing a bunch of stuff out there. And then you have other people that go, that's great, but you're forgetting about some of these things and these things and these things. You need both of those together so that you don't end up going careening off one direction or the other to the detriment of everybody. We need outside the box thinkers. We need people to come up with solutions, even if they seem far-fetched. And we need people to be able to sit there and apply essentially critical thinking and say, wait a minute, you can't just run off and do all of these things. There's these other things that are important as well. And we need a balance of it. And I don't think social media and the general atmosphere that we have going on today is helping things any. I think that in many cases it's making it worse, and then in some areas it is making some things better. It's not all one-sided, but the question is it doing more good than harm?
I think that both very good answers. I'm going to give a slightly different perspective, closer to Xandering's, and maybe put the gas on it just a bit. My father was a criminal defense attorney, and it takes a little while hanging out with other lawyers and with the system, and before you start to realize kind of how it works and what it means to have an adversarial process. And what that really means is, even if 3,000 guys saw this person do it, even if they confessed to doing it, even if there is legit purpose to going through the process and going through saying, we're still going to have a defense attorney who's going to try to tear that case down as best as possible. And sometimes they find faults in the system that even may get a guilty guy off, but you may prevent 10 more innocent people down the future. So that's why we have that process. So I think Xandering's absolutely right, and I think he brought up a great point about we need both parties for that reason, even if you're somebody who's of the mind that my party's always right and the other party's always wrong. If that's the case, good ideas should always be able to stand up to scrutiny, and even if it's scrutiny from somebody who is an idiot and doesn't know what they're talking about, it's important to have it and to take it seriously, and to not say the other side should shut up because I just am right. So I think that's a great point, and I think that adversarial process is important. I'm going to change that question mildly and say I'm assuming it's the American left and American right. And so I'm going to change that to a liberal and conservative, which is sometimes interchangeable, sometimes not. It wasn't certainly much more than 60 or 70 years ago. I do think you can say in general, just because that's sort of the definition of liberal, liberals tend to be for change, and they tend to be for going for the idea first, and we're going to give it a shot, and we'll see what. And I think conservatives tend to be like, whoa, wait, things are kind of working. We got the status quo, and you've got all these ideas, and you're not sitting there saying what's going to happen to X, Y, and Z person. What's going to happen to the economy? What's going to happen to? So I think liberals are sort of, and it's a priori. I think it's by definition. So I think you're going to find that this is just a generalization. Again, based on how the U.S. uses that language, liberalism is used differently in Europe. And there's a different history to the word. But right now, I think largely you can say, yes, liberals tend to be much more sort of, hey, I got this great idea, let's just do it. And conservatives are like, wait, you have not thought this through in any way. And it's great that you want to save the world, but you have to do that within the practicality of this world. And guess what? I don't think you've thought that through, and I think that's sort of the definition. That's why they're split that way. It's just we have those terminologies. We think of it that way, and so it's true almost a priori. But that's going to be my view. So, all right. So, I do think so. We've talked a lot about some of these problems, and I think they're pretty bad. I think Xandering may have another question or two that I want to hit to. So let's do this. I'd like to give Xandering a few more minutes to ask some questions. Then I really do want to find out. Dr. Todd, what is sort of your favorite bias, in as much as you sit there and say, oh my God, this is just amazing that we do this. It just that either tickles you or whatever. And then what's the one that scares you the most? What's the one that you're just sitting there going like, wow, the world would be a much better place if there is. I mean, there's so many biases. Maybe there isn't a way for you to do, but I'd like you to think about that question and give me an answer. But I want to pass this off to Xandering. Maybe Xandering, if you can do maybe another 10 minutes of the two of you going back and forth and discussing this a bit more, and then we'll have him answer those questions. We'll wrap it up, and we should be done, if that sounds good to everybody.
Sure.
All right. So Xander, it's all yours.
So I've always kind of looked at it as bias doesn't really matter too much, as long as there's a robust interaction of ideas between diverse peoples. That's one of the strengths that I think diversity actually has, is bringing a bunch of different biases together to come up with ideas, and those ideas then have to face the biases of everybody else. Now, if you start separating them out into groups, and these individual groups based on bias are looking at the answer, then I think bias becomes a very serious problem. But as long as everybody's a great diverse group of people are bringing ideas together to face all of these various biases, those ideas that tend to survive are probably pretty close to the truth. Do you think that that's true or not? Do you think that even in the case of a large number of biases arguing their points, do you still think that's a problem?
I totally agree. I think that the more diverse the population discussing an issue, the better. And you're exactly right. Everyone's going to bring their own bias. I've never said that all biases are negative. A bias is basically just a slant or a tendency. They tend to be things that we're raised with or educated with or just, we're used to. And I have a very strong bias about gravity because it's what I've always been experienced with. I was educated with it. And every time I've paid attention to gravity, it has paid off. And it's a fantastic bias. I've got a lot of negative biases as well. I think you even mentioned that you've got some biases that you're not particularly proud of, and I'm not particularly proud of some of my biases. I have to fight against them all the time because it was the way I was raised. I was raised in a lily-white suburban environment, and I wasn't used to things like interracial marriage. I wasn't used to things like gay marriage or anything like that. It's not what I was used to. So my bias is that I'm not used to those things. And to this day, when I'm exposed to them, I still get a moment's hesitation about, hey, I'm not used to that. Now, fortunately, through education and experience and more critical thinking, I've discovered, hey, there's absolutely nothing wrong with interracial marriage or gay marriage. But I still have the bias because my brain is wired that way. And so far, I've not been able to rewire it to get rid of the bias. I have to recognize that the bias is always there in an undercurrent, and I have to keep fighting against it with the critical thinking. But when you bring up the fact that people that come together in a group that have different biases, that's exactly right. And what they're doing is they're questioning each other's biases. You'll have the Christian talking with the Muslim and saying, like, look, I was raised in a church. This is what I'm used to. Oh, yeah? Well, I was raised, in Saudi Arabia, and we went to Mecca every, once in our lifetime, and this is what I'm used to. And then they can ask each other, well, have you ever questioned yourself about, why you did that? Well, it's where I was born. It's just what we did. Well, did you ever question it? It says, well, no, I was never really allowed to, or it really never came to my mind. So I've got no problem with biases as long as they're questioned. And in my book, that's what I go into. I'd make a distinction between a bias and a prejudice. I say a bias is just a slant, just a tendency that you tend to have from your upbringing. Now, if you don't question the bias, it's quite likely to evolve into a prejudice, where you just automatically assume that that's going to be correct. Now, if you actually act on the prejudice, it might actually turn into discrimination. So, again, biases are incredibly prevalent. Everybody's got them, but almost nobody questions them. They just assume that whatever they're used to, whatever their slant is going to be correct because it's what they're used to and what they're comfortable with, what their families may be used to, what their communities may be used to. And again, we're social animals, and we don't like to push back against our community because sometimes we're ostracized because of it. So we have this really strong predilection to just stick with our biases and not question them or not question them too strongly. So
that brings me into
when you get together as a group, you can question each other's biases, and like you say, whatever survives the onslaught, whatever survives the questioning, is definitely going to get you closer to the truth.
That's a good segue into what my next question would be is, so how do we stop people's biases from over affecting them and turning into prejudices, then being acted upon and becoming discrimination? How do we realistically, in today's world, how do we get people to think more critically, especially if they're not particularly interested in thinking critically or think that it's important? How do we change their mind?
Like I say, it's a hard sell. There's no question about that. Again, people don't want to think they have to think any harder about this. They want to stick with their position. And that's why I say I would love to get together a colloquium of people and say, like, how could we affect the population as a whole? I thought to myself, maybe it would take a YouTube channel. It might take advertising. It might take getting it into the public schools as a unit in social studies about learning critical thinking. I've often heard people say, well, you just can't teach critical thinking. It's just too complicated. And I say, well, I think that's BS. It doesn't take that much. But teachers will say, hey, look, we've got too much to already teach to the test right now. We just don't have time to teach critical thinking skills, even though they probably love their students to actually learn critical thinking skills. But I'll use just a quick anecdote of my own from my second grade class. Our teacher, on a rainy day when we couldn't go out to recess, had us all sit on the floor in a circle, and we played post office, where she read a short paragraph to the first person in their ear, just whispered it so nobody else could hear. And that person repeated it to the next person next to them, and it went around the circle in about 5 or 10 minutes. And of course, after 5 or 10 minutes, the original story was unrecognizable. And I keep thinking that was a wonderful, simple lesson to show how human bias interjects itself in just a moment and can totally change a narrative. They had the original paragraph that the teacher read, and then it was unrecognizable within 10 minutes of going through 30 people's minds. And I keep thinking that this teacher was trying to do a little critical thinking skill testing here, and that it only took 10 minutes. I mean, and it had such an impact on me and hopefully on all those kids. And it was a little vignette into how our brains can fool us. In just 10 minutes there, our brains totally distorted the narrative, what the quote unquote reality was. And that was an incredibly impactful moment for me, even just as a second grader. You keep on introducing those kind of things throughout school at all levels, and you start inundating people on Facebook and YouTube and all these other, TikTok or whatever it is, and they start realizing, holy crap, I do this too. And then you realize, okay, well, now I kind of see where all the problems in the world are coming from. They're not just these other people. I'm contributing to it as well. And again, they can take the next step to try to overcome that by using critical thinking.
But how do you get them to do that? I mean, do you think government needs to step in and start, like in the instance of the schools, and just say, no, look, we're going to add, even if at the cost of some other subjects, that we're going to add something like simple philosophy and critical thinking as a course in all of the schools, and that it's important enough to our future, which I do believe that is incredibly important to our future, that we're willing to say, look, we'll dumb down or cut out maybe one math, something has to go, okay, but I think that it's important enough that we institute these critical thinking to teach children that they need to be aware of bias, they need to be aware that they're subject to it as well. Do you think the government needs to step in and do something like that? Do you think that because if it was a popular supported movement, we would see it on things like TikTok and YouTube already. And there are definitely channels that deal with these kinds of things. There are skeptic channels. There are people saying, look, don't just believe all of this stuff. There's lots of channels that try and debunk, misinformation running around. And yet we still have this problem, and this problem appears to still be growing. So how do we actually motivate the people to do this? I mean, I agree that it's great that we need to, but what would be some good concrete actions we could take?
You're asking about the practical aspect, and that's why I say I'd love to get a colloquium together to discover what it is, because I don't know if government is necessarily the best way, because people think that, government always has some kind of ulterior motive, or are they trying to do like mind control or something like that? So, doing it in the public schools, since they're a government agency, may not be the most effective way. Maybe it takes doing it through YouTube or Facebook or TikTok that the government can't control. And I would love to get a bunch of marketing people together, because marketing people know how to get to people. They know how to get them thinking. They know how to get them to be attracted to something. And I don't have a background in marketing or even in sociology. But that would I can't answer your question, how you actually get this done on a practical scale. I've written a book and I do talks like this to try to get the word out. But of course, I'm only going to reach, a tiny fraction of the people. But, I keep dreaming about winning the lottery and being able to use as much money as I want to put this kind of stuff on popular media to get the word out to where it becomes almost so common to hear about, critical thinking and logical fallacies and cognitive biases, that people, they recognize what confirmation bias is as quickly as they do that you don't use the word ain't in English, or that 2 + 2 does not equal 5. It's like, well, we all learned this in school. We know not to do these kind of things, and we know not to be listening to the confirmation bias. If we could get it, that common, it would be fantastic. But you're right, because it's a hard sell, and people think, hey, we're doing just fine without learning critical thinking right now. Why should we do it? And I say, well, look at the world today. How many things do you complain about that you say, why isn't anyone doing anything about this? And almost always the answer can be whittled down to critical thinking. But again, it's not popular. This is not a popular topic.
Yeah, well, and it's nobody. Piaget had said that all salient learning is painful, and so what you're advertising here is, hey, let me show you why all these things that you think have been true for so long are wrong. I'm going to take away some of those endorphin hits that you like, and I'm not going to necessarily give you any immediate benefit for all of that. You're not a salesman.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. Well, you're right. That's but yeah, that's you need a salesman.
It's a great question. I just wish I had the answer, because it's hard to watch the world kind of burn sometimes.
Well, I do think it's something. I mean, if you're going to do something like Common Core, and if you're really going to start to get the government involved, which Common Core was something I was actually against, and it nuanced. But at any rate, having been a teacher and having seen kind of what was going through the system as and DeVos, oh my God, I got out of the school system right before DeVos, but I'd be talking to my friends and be like, oh, you bastard. I was like, yeah, I got out in time, didn't I? But at any rate, yeah, it seems to me that may not be a bad idea to just have, because ostensibly I think it's true, but people are going to think, okay, it's the liberals and their mojo trying to brainwash people, but it's sort of like the thing about logic and rational thought is it doesn't really care whether you're liberal or conservative, and it's going to improve your chances of coming out with the correct answer no matter what you do. So it really is it. But if you don't know it, if you don't know what it is, how can you know that that's what it is and it's not the tool of the liberal enemy? So I think yeah. All right.
Oh, great. What is your favorite favorite fallacy or bias, and what's the most frightening one?
Well, I mean,
the most whimsical, most funny.
Well, no, I mean, the most common one, of course, is confirmation bias. I mean, you have a bias, and so you're going to listen to everything that agrees with it, and the stuff that doesn't agree with it, you're not going to pay attention to, or you're going to do the file drawer effect and just put it, in a different part of your brain that doesn't pay attention to it, so you don't get the cognitive dissonance from it. But yeah, it's what everybody does, including myself. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm immune to confirmation bias. I love to listen to the people that agree to me, and that's why I actively ask for pushback. I say, okay, my own health and my own critical thinking and my own intellectual honesty, I need somebody to point out, Todd, you're making a mistake here. You're just kind of listening to what you want to listen to. So I always ask people, please point out where I'm wrong. And and I'm happy for that. Just like I think Nick started off the talk here today, is like, hey, if you've proven me right, I've learned nothing. But if you prove me wrong, I've learned something. And so I get an endorphin rush from confirmation bias like everybody else, but I have to fight against it. I have to fight against the pleasure of thinking that I'm right. It's depressing to see how often people just say, "Look, I'm going to go with my bias." I confirm it all the time by watching a particular news show or talking head show, or this guy who has a podcast. He's always saying exactly what I want to hear. It's incredibly entertaining, and I get an endorphin rush from it. Who wouldn't want that on a daily basis? Everybody wants endorphin rushes on a daily basis, but you don't learn from it, and no progress comes from it. And that's what kind of depresses me about, nothing but screens kind of entertaining people all day long.
All right. Before Xandring pushes you on the next one, I do want to do this real quick. So I put this up on our screen. This is because this is an interesting exercise, all right? And I want everyone to try this here. If you're watching us, give this a shot. And if you're getting the live stream on the internal, you're not going to see this. I could get you to see it, but it's going to take too much conversion right now, so you'll just have to listen along. I have a theory. I have a pet theory here. It's really important that I get this one right. And I have cards, and I can only see, well, of course, one side of the card, and the sides I can see read A, Q, 4, and 7. And what my theory is, and I have to get this right. This is an important one for whatever reason. Millions of children's lives are at stake here. And here's the theory, or the hypothesis. If a card has a vowel on one side, then there will be an even number on the other side. So this is an exercise in confirmation bias, and just one of the biases. So I say again, if the card has a vowel on one side, then it will have an even number on the other side. And the fate of the world rests on my figuring out if that statement is true or false. And you can only flip over 2 cards to test this rule. Now, I've done this in psych classes and stuff like that. They normally just say, which ones would you flip over? This one's making it even easier for you. It's telling you 2 cards. You can flip over the A and the 4, the A and the 7, the Q and the 4, or the Q and the 7. So everyone take a minute and think about which ones would you flip over to see if this rule were true. Remember, millions of kids' lives are at risk here, so you want to try to get this one right. So, and what I'm going to do, because we are starting to run a little low on time, I'd love to get both Xandring and Dr. Todd in on this, but I think I'm probably just going to go forward to it so I can ask the final question there and then start to wrap this up. But what happens is most people choose A and 4. So this would be A, and put in the live chat, by the way. Don't be afraid. Let's commit in writing. We're only recording this. It's only going to be seen by millions of people, or at least anyone who goes to the In Time channel, which I know isn't everyone. But let's. Okay, so for posterity, pick A, B, C, or D for your answer here. Most people choose A, which is A and 4, and the reason is these cards would confirm your statement, but we don't. Confirming the statement doesn't prove anything. The card number 4 has no ability to invalidate this hypothesis. So flipping the 7 card, however, if I were to flip the 7, that would could provide evidence disconfirming this belief. It could show that this belief is actually false. It could show that statement is false, because if I flip the 7 over, and it has a vowel on the other side, well, poof, this theory has to be completely wrong. But nobody thinks about flipping the 7. Why would I flip the 7? Well, I'd flip the 7 because if there's a vowel on the other side, I now know that statement is wrong. You don't think about doing that. You don't. That's 7. Nobody goes straight to that 7 and says, "Hey, if I flip it," but you got to flip that 7. So, yeah. So I think we've all seen stuff like this before, and Yeah, let me. I don't know. You probably, if you're watching the live stream, Dr. Todd, that's probably come up by now, and I can actually probably get that in your window if you really want to see it. But um, that's a beautiful example of confirmation bias. So I think you picked a good one. We got that up there. So I don't know. Any thoughts on that before we go on to before Andring there asks you about the one that you're most terrifies you.
I've got no comment on the cards. If Eisenberg's got a question, I'm happy to entertain it.
Oh, is Andrew any? Is he still there? Did we lose him? I have him on auto
No,
mute,
I'm still here.
so I can just hit the mute button. I just hit the mute button and poof, he's gone. But it's. I made it the biggest button on the panel, and that just means on occasion I hit it by accident. But
it's an important button to have because you never know what's going to come out of my mouth.
Yeah.
You have to be quick.
Yep.
I would point out on your little card trick there that that none of those, I mean, only being able to turn over 2 of those 4 cards, none of them can prove, well, one has the possibility to disprove it, but even if everything turns over and nothing disproves that statement, you still haven't proven the statement.
Well, if we're talking only about these 4 cards, then it actually would. If we're talking about all cards that could have been laid out and these 4, we're talking only about these 4.
Okay, if it's just those 4, then yes.
All right. So
turning over the 7 would be very important.
Yeah, turning over the 7 is, and that's the one that almost everybody always misses. So, and then they flip over ones that you don't need to flip over. Let me see which. I'm going to bring that one back up. Which one's the one you don't need to flip over? There's one that everybody flips over, but it actually doesn't matter what's on the other side, but because you're just trying to confirm. So let me bring this up because it's been a while actually since I've even looked at these. And yeah, no, I don't. Titan didn't have this. I wasn't going to even bring this one up. I've known of this for a while, and I just, as soon as Dr. Todd brought it up, I said, "Oh, let me snag it." And I've seen it with different letter combinations, and I've written about this one before. So let me figure out. So we got to flip over the 7. If a card has a vowel on one side, then it must have an even number. So it doesn't matter what's on the other side of the Q. Right? Because if it's not a vowel on that side. So actually, would it matter? Because I think in this iteration of this, every card does have a number on one side and a letter on another. So if that's a stipulation going in, we don't have to worry about the Q. We do have to worry about the A, and we have to worry about the 7. So I think the correct answer here would be B. So the Q, people sometimes flip over the Q because they say, oh, well, if there's a vowel there, if there's a even number there, that would disprove it. But since the Q is not a vowel, it actually doesn't matter what's on the other side of the Q. What's on the other side of the Q is completely irrelevant. Same thing actually with the 4.
I told there would be no tests.
Yeah, so the 4 is irrelevant. It seems intuitively you say, well, no, you got to flip over the 4 because if it has but that's actually a fallacy called affirming the consequence. So it doesn't matter what's on the other side of the 4 because we said if it's got a vowel on one side, it must have an even number on the other. Not if it has an even number, then it must have a vowel. So it doesn't matter that we see an even number there. That's meaningless. So sorting this is, it's really it takes some practice, and it takes just some getting used to how our brains formulate information. The correct answer here, I think, is looking at this quickly. I didn't prep this, folks. This is one of the reasons people are like, why? And Jason, if Jason comes back, Jason's already banned because he didn't like meatloaf. And he was just giving me a hard time about that in the intro. But he's also banned because he's just like, why do you use vMix? I use vMix because I can drop this stuff in a quarter of a second. It takes no time. It's like, oh, let's bring this in as soon as he brings it up. So anyways, there you go. I'm not self-conscious and post-hoc rationalizing at all. Zandring, why don't you take us home?
What fallacy or what comfort or what bias most scares you about going into the future? That people fall prey to.
Just so
what do you think is the most dangerous?
But if I had to pick one that kind of hits me locally, it might be the pragmatic fallacy. So many people say, well, I don't know about astrology or homeopathy or aromatherapy or alternative medicine or such, but you know what? It works for me. and it frustrates me because it tends to open the door to anti-science and other pseudoscience type things. They say, hey, if I did this aromatherapy and I felt so much better, so it wasn't hurting anybody. So what's the harm in it? I say, well, again, it's opening the door for every other logical fallacy and bias out there. You say, hey, if this didn't make sense to light a candle and use the scent to make myself feel better, but it worked. So what's the harm? And so you tend to give more credence to other illogical and irrational ideas rather than putting anything to the test. So, but again, we're lazy. We're mentally lazy. We say, why think any harder about this than I need to? Because it already worked. I've had success. And people, they get fooled by thinking just because I'm happier or I'm comfortable or I've had success, then whatever the way I'm thinking must be working just fine. And so when somebody like me comes across and says, well, have you thought about it critically? They say, why the hell would I do that? I've already had the success. I've already gotten the endorphin rush. Why would I work any harder than I have to? So, again, the pragmatic fallacy is just one of, scores of different fallacies out there, but it's one that's so common. And, we scoff at these alternative medicine possibilities and people using ivermectin and putting bleach up their butt or whatever to try to get over COVID. And, we say, how can people be so stupid? It's like they're not being, whether they're stupid, but it's not because they're not intelligent, they're not because they're not educated, it's because they're mentally lazy. They're not using their brain that they were given. And it's frustrating to me. And the very end of my book, I wrote a little soliloquy about you've won the lottery. You could have been born as a flatworm or as a gazelle or as a bird, but no, you won the lottery. You got a human brain. You have this incredible potential to use it. And what are you doing with it? You're watching maybe cat videos or you're getting an endorphin rush from confirmation bias, but are you really using it to its full extent? Because there's so many people that could have been born in your place, and they'd say, boy, I'd love to have that brain. You say, excuse me, I'm just going to keep using the ivermectin because that's what, makes sense to me. And that frustrates me. I just say, you with great power comes great responsibility. You got the power of the brain. You really ought to have the responsibility of learning how to use it. And that's why I'm such an advocate of critical thinking.
Thank you very much for that, Uncle Ben.
Oh, well, and actually, I got to tell you, I think I was thinking about this. The Uncle Ben, that's that aside. We're going to be doing a piece on Jordan Peterson, and we've done some research on it. It's going to be, people have been talking about it ahead of time, but I just realized you actually could be mistaken for Jordan Peterson under the right set of circumstances. So you almost connected us up to the wrong stream. So if we had started this and we were streaming to the Jordan Peterson thing for next week, which is queued up, I'd be asking you a very different set of questions, and you'd probably not be prepared. But yeah. All right. Well, I think that just about covers it, unless I'm missing anything. If anyone has any other points about this or anything they want to say, put it in the comments, and we'll either we can pass it on to Dr. Todd. He may also just come in and check those comments out himself, and certainly Xander and I will check them. I know that's not a plus for everybody and in everyone's book, but hopefully you want to hear our opinions if you're watching the show. So I'll leave a comment in the comments section. Come into our Discord and chat about this or any other topic. We're going to be doing overtime tomorrow, and we're going to cover it's what we do on overtime every week, which is no is ending. It's not try to take over the world. It's try to put the news in some context and see what's going on. So we're going to be doing that tomorrow. I don't know, is there anything I missed? It's always something I missed, but
I'm sure we missed a whole hell of a lot, but there's only so much you can shove into an hour and a half, so we have to let it go.
And we had some technical issues, so next time we'll give 45 minutes to connect, and maybe, maybe we'll. But thank you so much for coming on, and I think we're definitely going to have you back less than once every year and a half. So I'm glad you. It's like,
Appreciate
hi.
it.
Do you remember who?
Say we've just barely got our trousers off.
Yeah. Of course we met on.
I didn't even get dressed for this. You can't see me, so.
Okay, so you see the shield there on the right, which is covering his camera. There's a reason his camera is covered. I can raise that, but I don't.
Don't scar them like that.
You never know what. Oh, listen, and people know this story, but I'm just going to say this one more time because it was just one time I raised that camera. And it was just like, oh, everything will be fine. And he's sitting there stroking his AR-15. And that's not a metaphor. I actually honestly would rather that have been a metaphor. No, he's got the AR. He's holding on to it. He's stroking it. And I was just like, what the fuck are you doing? And he's just like, well, this is what you liberals think we're doing in our spare time, isn't it? I was like, actually, okay, you got me there. It's a good point. Yeah, you're right. That's what I should have expected. Speaking of biases, all right. Thank you all for joining us, and Discord later. I'll be dropping by later tonight. I'm going to go quickly check on the fam and get some other stuff done. Thank you again, Dr. Todd. Thank you, Xandring, and thank you to everyone who has contributed. That was a good live chat, and we will see you guys tomorrow. So, night all.
Good night.
Thank you so much, Nick and Eisendring.